Lewis Latimer. Do a lot of people here, I guess a lot of people here would know his name, but it's a name that is not a household name. He was a brilliant scientist who worked very closely with Thomas Edison and who didn't get a lot of recognition. He also happened to be a Black American. And you can't think of a better name or namesake for the fellowship, which the Edison Awards a few years ago began to identify promising Black entrepreneurs and find ways to mentor them. We're trying to make the future Carmichael Roberts of the world up here, one way or another. So without further ado, these gentlemen, it's John Cropper, who's I guess this was originally your idea, right? It was everybody's idea. Frank Bonafide, of course, runs the whole show here, and you just saw Carmichael. They are going to introduce us to, how many of them are there here? Are there 3 or 4 of them? Six Lewis Latimer fellows are going to give like their elevator pitch, which should be very interesting. But first, before we do that, let's roll the video so you understand a little bit more about just who Lewis Latimer was.
Hello, my name is Lewis Howard Latimer, and my story is seldom told. I was the youngest son of Rebecca and George Latimer, former slaves who bought their freedom with the help of a Black minister and the community. I was born in 1848 outside of Boston and attended only grade school. The remainder of my education was self-taught. I had an insatiable appetite for reading, drawing, and learning in general. At 15, I joined the Union Navy during the Civil War, and after a short stint and an honorable discharge, I returned to Boston, where I worked at the Crosby & Gold Patent Law Office and taught myself mechanical drawing and drafting. I became the head draftsman at the age of 20 and married my beloved Mary by the age of 25. In 1880, Hiram S. Maxim, chief engineer and electrician for the U.S. Electric Lighting Company, was very impressed with my talents and hired me. I took this opportunity to learn about the electric industry. During my tenure with Maxim, I invented an electric lamp with a carbon filament in 1881. A few years later, I began my association with Thomas Edison, serving as chief draftsman and expert witness on the Board of Patent Control. In 1886, I invented an apparatus for cooling and disinfecting. It was the forerunner to the AC unit and primarily used in hospitals. 4 years later, I wrote my first book, Incandescent Electric Lighting, a practical description of the Edison system. I was the only Black man to join the Edison Pioneers in 1918, an elite group of 28 innovators and visionary men who worked for Edison transforming the electrical industry. I retired at 75 and kept busy enjoying the arts and painting and music and consider myself as a bit of a Renaissance man.
Today, I look at the world and see that all culture that thrives needs the nourishment provided by risk-taking heroes. Without openly recognizing and celebrating these heroes, the culture would be devoid of its critical inspiration layer that educates the next generation of aspiring citizens about what is possible and encourages bold thinking at a systems level. The widespread omission of African-American innovator contributions to the advancement of society has had a particularly deep and misunderstood impact on future generations. I'm so very honored that the Edison Awards is channeling my spirit and recognizing me as Edison's principal collaborator. It's finally time to fully celebrate and acknowledge Black modern-day hero innovators that remain largely hidden. Our inaugural group of visionaries have been identified as a cohort that both I, Lewis Latimer, and my dear friend Thomas Edison would certainly welcome into our inner sanctums.
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming to celebrate what we think is the beginning of a new legacy program, and we're deeply excited and proud of. I'm John Cropper. I have a 20-plus year friendship with Frank Bonifiglia when he first started or took over the Edison and had a vision to reimagine it. The last few years, I was managing innovation for Aston Martin and traveled about 1 million flight miles in 2018 and 19, getting a chance to explore the planet through the lens of innovation and luxury. I was always the only person in the room, deep sense of isolation, or I'll say the only person of color in the room wherever I was. And then when COVID hit, and we all were forced to be locked up in our homes, true isolation other than through Zoom screens, it was time to start reimagining how, as a black man innovator, how I wanted to be able to bring my story to reality. During all of that, then it was August 28, 2020, and that was the day that Chadwick Boseman died. He was the actor who played the Black Panther, and maybe the only black superhero that had achieved global recognition at like meta scale, global scale. And and black people were dying at higher incidences 2-3 times due to COVID preconditions and so on. And it was on that day when I called Frank, actually the day after, and said, I think that it's time for us to leverage our unique platform with the Edison to try to cultivate a new collective of heroes, people who are often underappreciated, underrecognized. And we have this remarkable community of brilliant people, and if we could create a community and help to foster connection, we might be able to accelerate innovation and bring a new group of thought leaders out into the public. And that's really the beginning of how this all came about. And from there, Frank and I and the Edison team worked for a full year, designing a curriculum with a brilliant dean from Duke, Jackie, and a shout out to her, and developing a program for how we would go about fostering, I'll call it a new generation of superheroes. And that's really what we did. We then went through a process. We looked at over 100 candidates. Latimer was beyond having helped invent the light bulb and work with Alexander Graham Bell to help invent the phone. He also was a painter and a scholar, a poet. He was into music. So he had that typical hybrid right brain, left brain capability that you often look for in innovation leadership. And so through that, we found this incredible group here, and that's really, we announced it last year, but here we are, and during that process, we met Carmichael, and we call him Obi-Wan, or at least I do. He's Obi-Wan Kenobi, we're kind of just like young Skywalkers around here, but, it's been an incredible pleasure getting to spend time with Carmichael and build out this program. So, Frank, why don't you just share a little bit of your perspective?
When John calls and said, I've got this idea, do you know who Lewis Latimer was? And I didn't. I dug really deep into the research and I said, wow, he was a pal of Edison's. I mean, his name's on the patent. He's also on with Alexander Graham Bell. How come we've never learned about him before? And he's like, that's what I'm saying. What can we do? And it just hit me that there was a real opportunity to really find modern day superheroes who just happen to be of an African American descent. And I said, John, we've got the platform in the Edison. We see 500 new nominations every year. We've got companies who are coming to us, and they need to be able to meet these people. Let's collaborate further and see what we can do together. And so last year we launched it. And I have to say, it's been an amazing journey, and we've only started. We firmly believe that the fellows that you're going to meet today will change the world. And I'm excited for all of them to come up here and for all of you to meet them tonight as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and one last thing before we have them come up and briefly introduce themselves. it was actually through CAPS some years ago. We did research trying to understand what are the core characteristics of hyper-creative people who go on to not just develop an idea, but have the ability to package it and promote it. And we found that there were these 4 key things. It was empathy, the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's what we'd call human-centered design in the world of our good friend Walter Herbst and others. Pattern recognition. He talked about noise, door number 1, 2, 3, and you got to identify the pattern. That's pattern recognition. Synthesis, being able to put multiple ideas that seem unrelated together to create something new. And of course, the storytelling, the ability to articulate your vision with elegance and clarity. And so when we were going through that process, we saw that in every one of these incredible people. So first, maybe Azagun, you could come up and
Stand here? Or?
yeah, come sit. Dr. Ashagun Henry.
Thank you. So I'm Professor Ashagun Henry. I'm a professor at MIT in mechanical engineering. Specialty and expertise is in heat transfer and energy systems. Recently started a company called Thermal Battery Corporation. We have a technology that we're developing that is aimed at solving the grid level storage problem. So you have solar and wind that provide electricity when the weather is favorable, but when people want to use electricity is at other times. And so we have to store an overabundance of renewable electricity in some form of battery and discharge it back to the grid on demand. And so we have a technology that on paper appears to be 30 times cheaper than lithium ion. And so we are hopeful that it will be a big part of the solution to climate change.
So, right, we think that he might be the guy, solves the big problem there. That's a big one.
Well, one thing that was interesting, one thing I just realized in seeing the video again, I just remember it's kind of ironic. So a big part of this system that we're envisioning for thermal batteries is actually almost identically what Latimer referred to as a carbon filament as a heater. And so that's one part of the system, is essentially a giant light bulb, probably about the size of this stage, that gets glowing white hot and is part of the conversion system that ultimately we would use as a thermal battery. So this the connection to Lewis Latimer is very befitting.
Can you tell us a little bit about your musical?
Yeah, shout out to whoever did the beat. That video was dope. Yeah, so my background is I would say around age 15, I had to make an interesting decision about a path to take. So I grew up as a drummer, playing African percussion. And at around age 15, I had to decide whether or not I wanted to continue that path. I had been going around making money as a musician up till that age. And that was kind of the age where I decided I was going to go the engineering route and not actually continue with music. I still make music, still am a drummer. That's for life. That's part of who I am. But as Carmichael pointed out, in terms of things that you prioritize, I prioritized the impact that I could have on the engineering side more than music. I still make music, still love it. If you ask me what my passion is, it's actually music. But I think that in many ways there's crossover. The same tool set, the same skills, the same machinery that goes into improvisation and creating music is the same that ultimately creates new ideas in engineering. And so I had a lot of practice with it as a young kid. And so by the time I got to college, I was always constantly coming up with new ideas. And so that became, an easy muscle for me to flex.
Interesting. And I was wondering, Carmichael, if you could give a little bit of background about how your relationship with him as guys both in Boston and your mentorship role.
Yeah, I'm at a point in time in my life and my career, this comes back to, I think, what my daughter Jaden was asking me about at this point in time with all the stuff that I do, which changed. And I mentioned about being relaxed, but the other part is just I get a lot more leverage and it's more scalable if I can be so lucky to find someone like Ashe to just listen to. A lot of times I just listen to him tell me what's on his mind, from invention to new business models. This guy does not forget about just the science and engineering. He's got all sorts of ideas on how he believes companies should be built and how people work together. And he will tell you, I don't spend time cutting him off, telling him, well, let me tell you about all the pattern recognition is important. But I actually used the pattern recognition to see he's got an unusual blueprint in the way he thinks. And so I spend, we had dinner the other night. We got a group of, 5 of us together to just kind of talk about his idea and just listen.
Yeah, incredible. As we conclude, I just want to say a special thanks to our friends at Black & Veatch, Irvin, Clint, Stephanie. We introduced him to the Black & Veatch team, and they immediately saw the potential of his concepts and ideas and are standing behind us and have also been a contributor to the to the Latimer Fellowship as well. So I just wanted to reinforce our appreciation to the Black & Veatch team as we continue to build this. Thank you. We'll have our, please, Audrey. Hello. Dr. Audrey Bowden.
Hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Bowden. I am an associate professor of biomedical engineering at Vanderbilt University. I am very passionate about light and light-based technologies, which is very fitting with the Edison Awards program and Lewis Latimer's contributions as well. So I am interested in developing technologies that harness the power of light to assess health, to detect disease, and to monitor treatments. And so my laboratory that I run at Vanderbilt is developing various technologies across different application spaces, so anything from early stage cancer detection to ways to try to improve the success rates for infertility treatments, looking at various diseases for the eye and trying to get technologies in the hands of users and primary care physicians to lower healthcare costs. And I would say my dream is to see some of those technologies come out of the lab, get FDA approval, and into the hands of people like yourself, and become some of these technologies that are the mainstays of our ways of assessing and monitoring our health.
Incredible. Can you give us a little bit of background from coming up in New Jersey and your path through Princeton and everything? Just a brief little summary there.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in New York, the product of 2 parents who did not have a higher education, and so who really thought that education was important. I grew up in New Jersey, went to Princeton for my undergraduate, and ultimately went to Duke for graduate school. So I shared that with Carmichael. Ended up spending a year in Washington, D.C. doing public policy, and after that went on to do my postdoc at Harvard with George Whitesides as well. So Carmichael and I share a lot in common there. Then I went off to start my lab at Stanford University as a professor there. So I was the first Black female professor in engineering at Stanford. And after I got tenure there, I left and went to Vanderbilt, where I'm also the first Black female professor in engineering at Vanderbilt currently.
All right, take that. I'm curious about, with this incredible community of innovators that we have and come together every year. I know you said you already told us what your dream is, but how do you imagine, as we move forward in this over this coming year, what would be some of the things that you would be looking for as a researcher who has brilliant ideas and needs assistance to convert or tech transfer those ideas from the lab and into the world?
Yeah. Well, I just want to first just acknowledge the vision that you guys had for this program, and I really appreciate the fact that it's not just a come on the stage and say hello and then go back home program, but it really is intended to be a year-long mentorship experience with a cohort of people going through the same process. And so I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the networking opportunities, just even being here and meeting people who are passionate about impact. As an academic, we talked about hiding and Latimer being kind of in the shadows. As an academic, sometimes I feel like I'm in the shadows in terms of being able to impact things, because there's this process for doing things in academia, and there's this separate process, it seems, for doing things out in the world and in the business world, and just being able to bring those two things together, because at the end of the day, I didn't go into academia just to write papers. I went in there to develop ideas and technologies that are ultimately going to help people. And so I'm really hoping through this program to be connected with people who share that same passion and who've already achieved those goals, maybe in different spheres, but who can help me understand how to take what I'm doing and transition that out so that it really does not stay in the lab.
Great, and again, I also a shout out twice to Walter for hosting us the other day. He is a design legend, and it was interesting to have her talking to him about her product ideas and the need to make them beautiful, the importance of design and the human-centered design piece. And I thought that was an incredibly interesting example of the kind of conversations that naturally and organically happen in this process. So.
Yeah, and for me, that's always just been important. I think, two of the most important people that I want to please are my parents, who are already so proud of me, but my parents often ask me about the technologies that I'm developing, and I want it to be something that I can show them, that they can understand, and that they're proud of. And I think that being able to take what I'm doing and make it accessible to anybody, whether that be through the words that I speak or the visuals that I provide, I think is really important. And so I'm really looking forward to working through this program and helping to be able to better translate my work so that it's relevant for the world.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go with the broad jumper now. Byron Jones.
Thank you. Hello, so my name is Byron Jones. My daytime job is NFL football player. I'm going to year 8 with the Miami Dolphins. But in the off season, I like to explore real estate. I fell in love with investing, I would say, 4 years ago. I started to get in real estate, I would say, about 2 years ago. And what's mind-boggling to me is that, I'm in my own neighborhood, I saw a house get demolished and built within, 6-8 months. And just looking at the construction, you realize, wow, we're still building the same way we were building probably 100 years ago. With the same materials, the same techniques, maybe small adjustments here and there. And I thought that you look at the innovation that's been kind of passed for the past 20 years in technology and phones and TVs, that whole thing just doesn't make sense to me. So my focus now is, I'm on phase 1 of it, but I'm looking into building sustainable, better materials, cheaper materials, more sustainable, and also efficient materials. This is my first year being a quote-unquote developer. I'm building 4 single-family homes in Fort Worth. So I'm just trying to understand just developing at the basic level. And, one thing that's most inspirational to me as I've gotten older is well-designed spaces and knowing what that feels like. So I would say 2 years ago, I got an interior designer to design my space and at home in my apartment, and how that changed me on a fundamental level, the colors, the textures, how I went to a home and how I felt when I got home. I want to provide that same feeling, but on a lower end of the scale for people who are needing affordable homes. I'm sure we're all familiar with how expensive homes are today. And that's probably my biggest passion outside of football and outside of athletics, is finding ways to build homes that's sustainable, make them beautiful, well-designed, that last the test of time. And that's why I kind of fell in love with this, because it's kind of about 20 miles down the road from Babcock Ranch, and what they're doing over there is just absolutely incredible in terms of insulation, waste management, vertical farming, using solar power to power their entire neighborhoods and communities. So I'm here to learn as much as I can, learn from all my other fellows down here, and it's just a fun learning process for me.
Yeah. I think that for me, the fun learning process, those three words are the key to the whole game. Curiosity is the fuel of innovation, is the fuel of inspiration. Without it, we'd all be still like, in caves or something, right? And I love when when we all first met you, you explained to us your curiosity to learn when you got to school, that you evolved into a hyper-curious character. People don't realize that Lewis Latimer had no education, no formal education at all. Self-taught, lifetime learner. And I was wondering if you could just share a couple minutes about that journey through.
Yeah, so high school was a little rough for me. I was a good kid, but just didn't engage. I wasn't fully involved in the course material. And it wasn't until I got to college where I'm sitting in the kind of the center of the university watching people walk by. I got my chest out. I'm a D1 athlete. I'm here on a scholarship. I'm big, strong, thinking I'm the man. But these people are smarter than me. They're going to be better engineers. They're going to be founders of companies. These guys are going to be scientists. And if it was a competition in an employer's office, I wouldn't win that. Yeah, I can outrun them, I can outjump them, but I'm not going to create the things that's going to be impactful and important in this world. So I made a commitment to myself. I said, listen, you're spending all this time and energy being the best football player, the best athlete you can be. You have to apply that same energy to academics. And from there on out, I sat in the front, took notes. I can count on one hand how many classes I missed. And what I learned was just how fascinating subject matters can be once you take that hard exterior, where it's uncomfortable, it's frustrating, you don't really get it. You just peel back those hard layers, and then you get to the meat and potatoes of it. It's actually very fascinating. There was a time in my life where I liked calculus, which I never thought I'd say in my life. But I'm like, this is kind of dope, man. I kind of get this. I see how it applies to the real world. And I just kept that throughout my entire career in college, and even when I got to the league, you hear about guys going broke, and I was like, hey, that's not going to be me. I'm not going back to Connecticut. So I started reading personal finance books, and I just YouTube videos, learning as much as I can, as fast as I could, and I found another passion, investing, and that's how I kind of transitioned over to real estate. But just being a lifelong learner for me is really the big reason why I'm up here today. So shout out to Byron Jones at 18 years old into college.
Thanks, Byron. Thank you. Let's talk about dark matter now. Hello.
Hi.
So I'm wearing my NASA shirt in respect to the doctor here. Tell us your story.
Share a passion, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. So my name is Ayana Arce, and I am, it's okay. And I am a particle physicist. I'm a professor at Duke University. My real passion, my interest is understanding the fundamental structure of matter and energy at the smallest scales that we can imagine. So my research is at the Large Hadron Collider, which is the biggest microscope that has ever been built on Earth. And I'm interested in this stuff because somehow I know, well, theoretically we have reasons to understand that how matter and energy behaves now at the smallest possible scales is connected to the story of the universe at the first moments of its birth. And I want to be able to draw the connection between what we see now, the matter we see that actually makes up all of these fabulous innovations that we've seen, and what happened in the first moments of the cosmos. So with that interest, I think there is a fantastic scientific story. I want to tell that story in mathematically precise language, but I also want to be able to share it with the general public, with you, with your kids. And so I'm excited to be a part of this program because of the focus on storytelling.
Yeah, and I spent a good half of my career in Hollywood and motion picture business, and a lot of these ideas are extremely complicated and difficult for people to understand. How we can use our skills as storytellers to deconstruct these ideas and make it more accessible to people and hopefully attract more creative talents that want to explore these things, that's what this is, a big part of what this is about. We had a great conversation about STEM education. creating perhaps like some animated characters and things that could kind of break it down to like the ABCs when we were kids. What was that? Conjunction, junction, what's your function? You know? And I'm curious what your thoughts are about that aspect of your journey.
Yeah. So in terms of my journey, I think, yes, Sesame Street and all of that was a big part of it in the beginning. But I'm drawn to the imagination around science fiction. And when I was young, this imagination was really about rockets and new biological technologies. And I found this really exciting, and I used it to sort of frame my interests in science. How could I learn more about the things that these writers are just imagining and making up? And I think that's still very powerful. I believe in the power of stories and imagination, collaboration with people who write, who create art in other ways, in order to reach people who maybe wouldn't otherwise see science as an interesting path. I mean, I'm the product of an English professor, and so being here as a scientist was a long journey.
No doubt. Yeah. Carmichael, we talked some time ago about organic chemistry, and you were saying that elements and the structure in inorganic chemistry reminded you of the architectural structures of Buckminster Fuller. And when I hear her talking about dark matter and what makes up the particles in space, my head explodes, and it's beyond my level of comprehension. But I love the idea of scalability, things that down at the nanoscale all the way out to the expanse of the universe. I'm just curious, Carmichael, if you could share that perspective there, which was really interesting.
I think it goes into, I think Ashe said it. When Ashe was talking about his, in fact, he admitted music is what he loves even more. I mean, this is a tenured professor at MIT. You're unbelievable. We talk about this all the time. To say that that's secondary, maybe slightly, and that the music side is your passion, but you see how it mixes over and how it all relates. And I can listen to how you describe, things, and John talks about the left and the right side of the brain. And I think that there's so much that you can see in a lot of the sciences crossing over to the arts, and the arts influencing the sciences, and that allows them the communication. The communication gets a lot better when you can relax into that and understand how to get people to relate, regardless of whether they're more English arts or whether they're more, physics, particle physicists,
Particle physicists, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to start developing some cool sci-fi characters with you. So, I know we got some sci-fi fans in the house. Thank you. Last but not least, Mr. Kamisi.
Oh, yeah.
That's his knee.
Dario Calmisi.
Hi, how are you? My name is Dario Calmese, and I'm probably more the culture piece. I do not have a PhD, but I think, in a way, like Carmichael, when you were speaking earlier about really being like a translator or someone who then, that's translated into thinking about range, maybe that's kind of really where I fit in. So I think maybe most recently, I don't know if any of you remember, but in 2020, we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and there were also protests happening in the street, and there was this cover of Viola Davis that kind of went viral around the world. And it was also the first Black photographer who shot a cover for Vanity Fair. And that Black photographer just happened to be me. So not only doing that work, but also working a lot in fashion. So directing fashion shows that are kind of hailed as the #1 fashion shows in New York and around the world. And then also writing, and I'm a professor at Parsons New School of Design. And it's interesting, I have a background in performance, actually, And as I, speaking about curiosity, speaking about, living through the world and maybe being in a lot of spaces where you're the only person in the room. And I think even in that journey, and I'm sure you guys can attest, like really looking for yourself reflected, right? Like looking for a mentor, looking for someone who could maybe somehow give you permission of a pathway of being. And throughout all of this, right, through the performing, through the photography even, not seeing those people, not finding that person. And so I find it really interesting to be here, at the Edison Awards and speaking about Lewis Latimer. And, Frank, you mentioned, even here being, at the Edison Awards, not knowing that this person existed. And so for me, this is something that I'm extremely passionate about. So beyond working, in the cultural space, and translating, but also storytelling, like telling those stories, right? Like making sure that there's not a young Black kid in Ohio who does not understand that there was a person who lived called Lewis Latimer, who's probably interested in the same things that you're playing with, in your living room. I'm sure many of us grew up playing with chemistry sets and, Connects and Legos. And I was one of those kind of geeks too. So beneath like the cool shoes and the leather gloves, I'm actually like a really big nerd. And so for me, it's about telling those stories. And so in 2020, I also launched a podcast, which is actually a platform called the Institute of Black Imagination, which is an institution that is dedicated to the Black imaginary continuum through the lens of design and telling those stories. And so we're really looking at that through the framework of the past, the present, and the future. The past being, someone like a Lewis Latimer, which we call archival intelligence, and then the present, which is about bringing Black imagination into space and time. So, many of the people here sitting on these chairs, right? How do we make sure that individuals understand what Black imagination and design looks and feels like in the current day, right? Like you can touch it and feel it. If we know what Black music sounds like, then what does Black space feel like? Byron, you spoke about space and how important that is. And then thinking about the future, so a pedagogy, how do we make sure that Black and brown youth have access to the information that they need in order to excite and ignite their own imaginations, that will then give us all the ability to live more equitable and promising futures. And so that's like a rough snippet of what I've been up to.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm a little speechless because I feel a deep sense of pride and a deep sense of excitement because this group was selected not based on their pure brilliance, but on the idea that as a unit, these different ideas with these different brains, I think have the potential to shock in all the world, and that's what we're here to do. So thank you guys very much for everything.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing before we close here. When we relaunched the Edison Awards platform about 20 years ago, we made it a point that asked all of our nominees to check the box that they would give back. And we never said what that give back was going to be. But today we're going to ask you all to support the Latimer Fellows, not just today, but next year's Latimer Fellows and the year after that. Because as you can see, they're going to change the world. And one of my proudest moments would be to see all of you in that audience be there to support them on their journey.
And there's one last thing I forgot to mention. There's a sixth fellow who unfortunately had a skiing accident and was unable to attend. His name is Dr. Ray Von Fusche, a great name. He is a professor of cultural studies at Purdue University. He's considered the foremost scholar on Black American achievement and innovation in the world today. He also just recently became the director of the Social Sciences Department of the National Science Foundation, where he oversees a $100 million budget to invest in scholars and visionaries like Dario in the social sciences. 70% of people who won Nobel Prizes in economics got their initial grants and funding through this department that Ray Von now manages. That's the importance that he brings to it. So that's social sciences. And so unfortunately he couldn't be here. He sends his regards, but look forward to sharing the crazy stories that he's going to help us to write as well.
All right.